This is the story of a man who escaped certain death, seized total control of a foreign superpower's economy, and became the richest individual the world had ever seen. He engineered one of history's most catastrophic financial bubbles, only to watch it all crash down, dying a gambler who never accepted the magnitude of his failure. This is the story of John Law, the man who engineered and then gambled away the nation of France. John Law was born in 1671 to a wealthy family in Edinburgh. His father was a goldsmith, a profession that, in the late 17th century, effectively functioned as the banking system of Great Britain. A widespread coin shortage across the continent forced Europeans to hoard what little gold they had. Goldsmiths, being trusted handlers of precious metals, would issue promises to pay essentially IOUs of gold, which were used to settle debts. If you wanted to transfer wealth, you simply wrote a letter to the goldsmith. This environment of credit and promissory notes is where John Law cut his teeth. Young John was a prodigy with numbers, but his true passion wasn't banking. It was the casino. John loved the thrill of risk. He was a drinker, a womanizer, and a fixture at gaming houses. He was known as Beau Law, a dashing figure in the social scene. When his father died, John took his inheritance to the London high life, attempting to get rich through high-stakes gambling. It didn't work. He gambled away his fortune and mortgaged his family estate to cover the losses. But financial ruin was the least of his problems. John was involved in a feud with a man named Beau Wilson, likely over a woman. The rivalry escalated until it ended in a duel. At 23, John Law killed Wilson and was arrested for murder. Sentenced to hang, his life seemed over. However, his high-ranking friends petitioned for a pardon, and his sentence was commuted. While awaiting a lesser charge, in a plot that remained shrouded in mystery, John Law escaped prison and fled to the continent. For the next 21 years, Law lived as a fugitive nomad. He bounced between Amsterdam, Venice, Genoa, Turin, and Paris. In each city, he didn't just gamble, he studied. He analyzed the banking systems of Europe, obsessing over the mechanics of value. He concluded that money shouldn't be limited by the amount of gold in a vault. He believed money should be backed by the state's potential, specifically its land, allowing for a flexible supply to stimulate the economy. He observed the Dutch, whose wealth came not from hard labor, but from abundant credit and a fluid money supply. Law began writing proposals. He pitched a land bank to the Scottish Parliament, arguing that paper money backed by land would revitalize the country's stagnant industries. Scotland rejected him. He took his ideas to the King of France, Louis XIV. The Sun King, an absolute monarch who believed his power came from gold and God, dismissed the Protestant gambler immediately. But luck is a gambler's best friend. In 1715, Louis XIV died. He left behind a 5-year-old heir and a nation in ruin. The regency fell to the Duke of Orleans. The Sun King's 72-year reign had expanded France's borders, but his endless wars and the construction of Versailles had obliterated the treasury. France was drowning in 3 billion livres of debt, roughly the size of its entire yearly economic output. Farms lay idle, bankruptcies were rampant, and the economy was grinding to a halt. Enter John Law. He had befriended the Duke of Orleans years prior in the gambling dens of Paris. Now, the Duke was the ruler of France, and he was desperate. Law proposed a radical solution, a bank that issued paper money. This would stimulate trade, pay off the debt, and restore French glory. Despite opposition from conservative nobles, the Duke agreed. In May 1716, the General Bank opened. It was conservative at first, holding gold reserves and issuing notes that were accepted for tax payments. Law added a brilliant twist. He made the paper notes more stable than gold coins, which the crown frequently devalued. Trust in the bank soared. Commerce revived. People began to believe in the paper. But a bank was just the beginning. Law needed a vehicle to absorb the massive national debt. He looked across the ocean to France's colony in North America, Louisiana. To the French public, Louisiana was a land of untold riches, a New Mexico filled with gold mines. In reality, it was a swamp plagued by hurricanes, disease, and alligators. It was a financial black hole. Law didn't care about the reality. He cared about the potential. He acquired the trade monopoly for the territory and rebranded it as the Mississippi Company. He then went on a buying spree, acquiring the tobacco monopoly, the East India trade rights, and the mint itself. He effectively consolidated the entire French economy into one massive conglomerate. To finance this, he issued shares. He allowed people to buy shares using their government debt bonds. This was the masterstroke. The government's debt was converted into corporate equity. The public, desperate for a return on their worthless bonds, flocked to the company. Law was a master marketer. He paraded miners through the streets of Paris, carrying gold ingots allegedly from Mississippi. He sold the dream of a new world. The share price, initially 500 livres, began to climb. 1,000, 5,000, 5,000, 10,000. Paris went insane. This was the first major stock market mania in history. The street outside the company headquarters, the Rue Quincampoix, became the center of the financial world. Dukes rubbed shoulders with footmen. Servants became millionaires overnight, a term coined during this very bubble. Rents on the streets skyrocketed. People jumped down chimneys just to get into the offices to buy shares. Law was now the Controller General of France. He was the economy, but the system was built on a lie. The Mississippi Company wasn't generating profits, it was a swamp. The dividends were being paid out of new share sales, a classic Ponzi scheme structure. To keep the price up, Law had to print more money. The bank and the company were now one. He flooded France with paper currency to fuel the stock frenzy. Inflation exploded. The price of bread, cloth, and rent doubled, then quadrupled. The millionaires were rich in paper, but the paper was rapidly losing its purchasing power. Smart investors, sensing the top, began quietly converting their shares and notes back into gold and smuggling it out of the country. Law panicked. He realized the gold reserves were draining. He convinced the regent to pass draconian laws. It became illegal to own more than 500 livres in gold coin. Authorities were empowered to search homes. They encouraged citizens to spy on their neighbors for a cut of the confiscated gold. The dream of prosperity had turned into a police state. The end came swiftly. In May 1720, Law tried to deflate the bubble in a controlled manner, reducing the official value of shares and notes. The public confidence, the only thing holding the system together, evaporated instantly. Panic swept Paris. The mob that once cheered Law now hunted him. They tore his carriage to pieces. A run on the bank ensued. Thousands clamored to exchange their paper for whatever coin remained. In the crush, 15 people were trampled to death. The bodies were carried to the royal palace in protest. The game was up. John Law, the man who owned France, was ruined. He was dismissed from his post and granted a passport to flee the country he had both saved and destroyed. He left his wife, his children, and his vast real estate empire behind. The aftermath was brutal. The Mississippi Company collapsed, wiping out the savings of a generation. France returned to the gold standard, traumatized by the experiment. The debt remained, a burden that would plague the monarchy until it was finally settled by the guillotine of the French Revolution decades later. John Law spent his final years in Venice, a gambler once more. He died in 1729, poor and largely forgotten. He went to his grave insisting his system was sound, blaming the panic of the people rather than the flaw in his design. Today, every nation on earth uses the system John Law pioneered, fiat money, backed not by gold, but by the faith of the state. The gambler lost the hand, but in the long run, he won the game.